Across the ether. And ladies and gentlemen, just like that, we did it again. We successfully landed on LinkedIn, YouTube, and the Creative on Purpose Facebook page. Welcome to Creative on Purpose Live, conversations about cultivating greater fulfillment and equanimity in endeavors that make a difference. I'm your host, Scott Perry, author of Onward and head coach of Akimbo Workshops and chief difference maker at Creative on Purpose. If you're ready to cultivate equanimity while you make a bigger difference, visit creativeonpurpose.com and grab a copy of The Burnout Solution. Let's meet today's guest. I'm so excited. Sharon Lebell, welcome to the broadcast. Please tell the viewers who you are, what you're up to these days, and where can people go to learn more about you and the fantastic difference that you're making.
Okay. My name is Sharon Lebell. I'm probably best known for something I did decades ago, which was to write a book called The Art of Living. It's the classical manual on virtue, happiness, and effectiveness. And it's a popularization of the ideas of the great Stoic teacher, Epictetus. I wrote this way back in the day, in the last century, actually, before anyone was paying attention to Stoicism, to Epictetus in particular. I remember talking to the New York Times, and they called him Epictetus or something like that. But he was an obsession of mine, not him as a personality, but the very down-to-earth, everyday wisdom that he offered. And so to this day, the book has been translated into countless languages. It continues to be a kind of bedside favorite. Some people use it as a kind of a daily book for setting their compass at true north. And I've gotten actually a lot of messages from veterans, from soldiers who have carried the book into the theater of war. And it's helped pull them back from the brink when life has been too much. You can find out about who I am and my work at sharonlebell.com. And these days, I'm always doing a lot of things. I always follow the next good idea, or I trust that it's a good idea, and I follow it. And what I'm doing these days is continuing my work as a musician. I play a one-of-a-kind, it's like a hybrid between a hammered dulcimer, a santur, and a cymbalom. It's got big, monstrous thing that's got 100 strings, and it has an ethereal sound. And I feel duty-bound to liberate its, for lack of a better word, holy sound for the world. So I'm always doing that, composing on that. Music is a language I actually feel much more at ease in than spoken language, written language. And I'm also working on a book on women in Stoicism now, because there's a gaping hole there. So that's what's up.
Yeah, well, lots of juicy stuff to unpack there, but I want to start by reflecting a story about me and the art of living. So as you and I were just discussing before we came on, I am here on Emerald Isle. My wife and I are taking a vacation, our first beach vacation in 6 years. 15 years ago, we were just a few doors down, staying here with our two sons, and I brought The Art of Living with me, and I read it on the sand, in the sand, out by the ocean. So I'm pretty sure I'm the only person that was reading something inspired by Epictetus here on the beach. That book had such a profound impact on my life, and I cannot thank you enough for creating it, for sharing it. And I don't know why it landed in my lap at that moment in my life, but it landed just when I needed it. And so, ironically, I have the Robin Hard translation of Discourses, which I've never read. And I'm reading that this time around at the beach. So Epictetus at the beach two times. And in full disclosure, Sharon, my main man is Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, yeah. I'm on your team.
Awesome. And another thing that just another alignment that we have is I was a professional musician for 30 years. My instrument is a little more mundane, the guitar. And I love what you said about music as a language, because that's something I taught all of my students. I had a guitar studio for 20 years in the little town where we live in. And I would tell my students, it's serve the song, don't make the song serve you. It's music as a language. Languages are used to connect and communicate and collaborate and create. And I'll just also finally share that I was invited to attend the Women in Stoicism two-day event that you were the keynote at, and you closed with some riffing on your instrument, and it was really, really spectacular. I really, really enjoyed that. I enjoyed that entire event more than any other Stoic conversation I've joined, and I've joined a lot of them. So thank you for all of that work. Here's the thing that jumped out from your introduction. You brought up the idea of trust, which is a subject near and dear to our hearts here at Creative on Purpose. We talk a lot about the Goethe quote, as soon as you trust yourself, you will know how to live. And you talked about following the next good idea. I wonder if you'd be willing to just unpack a little bit more about how you think about and leverage trust, and how do you know when the next good idea is availing itself to you?
Well, I mean, if I'm really honest, I never know. Life is an unfathomable mystery, but we can't just stand there inert. We've got to try something. I hope I won't sound like I'm off my rocker. I get what I call the voice. The voice, it's not like an audible, hey, Sharon, but maybe it's less of a voice. It's more like something beeps at me and just says, go this way, try this. And it's always ended up that that's been the right thing. I mean, it happens that I determine that ex post facto, but actually, Scott, I think that just if we ever give ourselves wholeheartedly to anything, I don't see how anything but good can ensue. I suppose in a way that's a restatement of the Goethe quote. But it's true, when you just fully enter something, whether it's a text you're reading or a conversation, whatever is happening right now, if you dare to care and just be willing to be just an abject fool, a clown, but you're going all in, it works out. And I mean, that's the greatest understatement in the world. I mean, extraordinary things happen, but you can't will them. You have to just take, it comes back to what you're saying. The key word is trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the saying, you can't push the river. And much of the time, many of us, especially here in the good old USA, because of all the abundance and privilege that we enjoy, we find ourselves trying to reverse engineer all the results, all the things that we want in the world. And I love what I don't think it's off your rocker at all to talk about the voice speaking to. I mean, one of my favorite books is Parker Palmer's Let Your Life Speak, and that comes from the Quaker saying. And your life will speak to you if you are quiet enough and sit still, have enough stillness. Stillness doesn't mean inert. Stillness means that you have cleared some bandwidth so that you can hear, because the voice wants to speak to you. Life wants to unfold. Well, life is going to unfold, but you can be in the here and now and quit cycling on harmful stories about your past that aren't serving your health and happiness, and without clinging to all the outcomes and results that you desire, and pay attention to what's going on now, and life will avail itself choices. And what I love about what you were saying is, so you just choose and you do, because yeah, you're probably going to do it badly before you do it well. That's how you learned how to walk, talk, read, write, everything else meaningful in life. Well, that's one of the things that I love about just your presentation during the Woman in Stoicism conference, and the fact that you played your instrument at the end. There was so much joy and playfulness in that, in both your talk and in the act of playing your instrument. And so much of the time, I think we just take ourselves and our situation a little bit too seriously. And if we held it a little bit more lightly, we could actually have some fun and let our life speak to us and make a bigger difference in the world.
Amen and hallelujah, brother. I have to say that I was being a little bit affectionately mischievous at the Women in Stoicism conference. I've wanted so much for modern Stoics to get that it's not a contradiction to be frisky and free inside and still benefit profoundly, even in a transformative way, from Stoic teachings. So
yeah, well, you're definitely in the spirit of Epictetus, who was a provocative. He strikes me in reading through the discourses as someone that was sometimes intentionally speaking with a pointed stick. He wanted to get
under some fun.
So I love that about your presentation, and just I love that idea that frisky is a great word. It's a juicy. I just wanted to quickly bring in my friend Rocky, and Rocky and I know each other through my work in Seth Godin's workshops, and Rocky is an alum of several of them, and he is a huge fan of your book. In fact, I think he reads a section out loud almost every day on LinkedIn. So Rocky, also a really huge fan. I wanted to talk a little bit, if you're willing. I know that you're getting ready for StoiCon. And you and I first saw you in real life, as it was virtually, in the Women in Stoicism conference. One of the things that was, again, one of the best Stoic related events I've ever attended. And one of the things that there was just a really different vibe in the entire event and in all the presentations, which were all presented by women, with the exception of Greg Sadler, who led a session with his wife. And just wondering, like, you spoke about women in Stoicism being kind of an under-investigated, under-shared thing, and that's what you're working on next. Do you see any distinction in the way that women approach Stoic, women who do weave in Stoicism into their life, or Stoic reading into their learning, how they either approach it or leverage it differently than perhaps that men do? And feel free to avoid the question if you don't want to go there.
Sure, not at all. Well, I would be overreaching to speak for women, but I can speak from my own observations, and that is, we haven't been part of the conversation until very, very recently. It is not our experiences that Stoicism, in terms of its original texts, came from. So there's a big missing piece there. Uh, we do things like give birth, kind of major. We make people. And that is a very important part of the human condition because there's no human condition without it.
Mm,
And so I don't mean to talk about women purely in terms of our reproductive abilities, far from it. But I think females we're less, we don't have a personal stake as much as men do in the philosophy, because in a way, it's not our tradition. It's something that we elect to be part of and to engage with. And I think we have a lot not only do we have a lot to offer the tradition, which to its credit evolves. I mean,
mhm,
I don't think women would even touch it with a 10-foot pole if it weren't naturally permeable, if it didn't naturally not have a boss. I mean, that's a huge thing. There's no official cult leader, to disgrace himself. It's just a body of really, really good ideas that we can take on as our own if we want to.
mm. Yeah, I love that. One of my friends, Annette Simmons, is an author she's primarily written about storytelling, but now her new book coming out this month is called "Drinking from a Different Well: How Women's Stories Change What Power Means in Action." And one of the things that I was graced with a advanced copy and an invitation to blurb the book. Um, and one of the part of her thesis is that um, we read a lot of men's stories because for a long time privilege was grossly unfairly distributed and only men's stories were really available, and they tend to be competitive stories of competition,
Yes.
and women's narratives tend to be more collaborative. And that was one of the things that stood out to me at the event, having attended several events that were much more male dominated. There did seem to be that competitive kind of posturing vibe that I've also witnessed in my short stint in academia. Um, and at the Women's in Stoicism event, I didn't pick up that really at all. And what I felt was there was a communal um, desire to just be as generous and sharing as could be about, again, to what you were just saying about how a woman's perspective and a woman's application to this beautiful philosophical tradition that is based on the idea that if you just work at being a better person and do your best effort with intention and integrity, that's all the reward you need in this life. So really appreciate your going there with me and sharing those reflections. Do you have a due date for your next work?
I'm going to finish it by end of well, the first draft, I should say, end of this year, but I plan to have it out next year.
Next year, fantastic. I can't wait. So sounds like it's going to be really, really impactful. Curious if you mind sharing a little bit of your origin story. How did you trip over Epictetus? And if you don't mind sharing, like what was it that inspired you to write The Art of Living?
Well, that's easy. So I was the little kid with the Coke bottle glasses, the little square peg who didn't fit into the round hole, etc. I know I'm not alone in that regard. I mean, what you find out when you grow up is that everyone felt that way. But I was just, since I was very young, I was always interested in the fundamental questions of life because I just found it amazing that we existed. I just I kind of couldn't get over that. Anyway, I'll condense the story a little bit, but I had the good fortune of, I lived in a very multi-ethnic neighborhood. And the fellow who lived across the street from us was from India, and he was a philosophy professor at the local college, and he happened to give me, when I was pretty young, what, looking back on it, was probably an intro to philosophy, like a survey course. Anyway, I read it and really didn't understand it, of course, at that time. But you know how when you're just sensitized to something, it 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 plants a seed to beep later, for the voice to say something later. And so, just throughout my young life, I was always reading philosophy, especially existentialism, because that was the hip daddy-o stuff. And then in college, I ended up studying philosophy and religion, and ended up doing graduate work in that too. And finally, uh, well, long story short, I was a young mother, and my life was 52 pickup, and I happened on reading Epictetus's discourses, and I was amazed that no one had told me about this guy. I was finding ore, hidden treasure, and so I just set about, really for my own benefit, just writing his words in a way that a harried 20th, 21st century mother of what felt like a million kids at the time, they've since fledged, um, what she would need to hear. And then it turned out that it did have some universal benefit. So that's the condensed version.
Well, I really appreciate that. My collision was with Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which was loaned to me by my Latin teacher in 7th grade, because he was a classicist who would translate the original Greek into Latin and then have us translate the Latin into English. And I
Wow.
loved that exercise. And so I would ask for extra work. And finally, one day he said, "Listen, kids, stop bothering me. Here's a copy of the damn book. Go read the book." And I borrowed that book so many times that he gave it to me as a graduation present when I finally graduated. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was, Marcus was talking to himself in the very same way that I talked to myself, and I just couldn't get over that. Like whatever I was, 13, 14 years old, had something in common with the most powerful man in the ancient world in his time, and that we were asking ourselves basically the same questions and speaking to ourselves in the same way. It's never left me, and I love your story. And yes, I had the glasses and the overbite and all the rest of it. So yeah, I was never invited to the cool kids table either.
We showed them
That's right. Look at us now.
philosophers.
Well, that's maybe one last question before I get to the real last question, and that is, one of the things that I love about Stoicism is that it's in the Hellenistic era, everyone was asking, like, these were everyday conversations happening with everyday people. It wasn't just reserved for the hallowed halls of academia. And one of the things that Stoicism just doesn't require you don't need a lot of pre-learning or background or a lot of lingo. You don't have to learn like all these terms and all these processes. You can just start with Marcus or Epictetus's handbook or whatever. It's like, as someone that practices, lives their philosophical discipline in your work and I'm sure your relationships and your just everyday living. What are your thoughts on how we can bring philosophy back back into the world, and not have it just reserved for the people that want to hang a sheepskin on their wall when they've mastered the text.
Right. Oh, many good questions embedded in that question. Uh, well, the first thing, I'll take one piece of that. First of all, how do we keep philosophy and its riches alive and animating ourselves on a daily basis? I think it's really important to admit to ourselves that it is absolutely human nature to drift and return, to drift and return, inhale, exhale. And by drift, I mean we drift away from our ideals. We drift kind of to sleep from our spiritual aspirations. One of the ways that, uh, and this fortifies my position as a popularizer, the person that academics love to hate, is that one of the ways we can return kind of quicker, I think, is by using simple mnemonics that are just quotations from philosophers whom we admire. And, some people might sneer at that and say, oh, well, those are just like slogans that you can put on a coffee cup or something. Yeah, 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 yeah. But the thing is, in life, we're dog paddling. We don't have time when we're trying to navigate all the micro decisions that we're making in any given day. We don't have time to dive into erudition. We have to make sure that we just, in this pivot point, summon the better part of our natures. And one of the best ways we remember to do that, or do that little course correction, or call it what you will, is through picking out a couple of sayings that just, hey, Lebell, wake up, change the direction of your ship by 1 degree. So,
Mm.
uh,
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. The last question I always ask my guests is just for a final tip or piece of advice that would help people that show up for this show that are either aspiring to discover, develop, and deliver the difference only they can make, or to advance in an endeavor that they already have going. And I'm wondering if you're willing, I'd like to tweak the question a little bit, and if you don't mind sharing, what are one of those quotes that you keep close at hand to remind yourself, "Hey, LaBelle, wake up and get back, get back on the ship."
well, it's absolutely, Epictetus 101, which is know what you can control, or remember what you can control and what you can't, because that's our essential struggle, right? We're circling back to the beginning of our conversation, where we're always, always, always trying to influence those outcomes and try to mold them to what we think is best. And, we crash and burn every time. And so if we can just keep, the fancy people call it the dichotomy of control. I just call it, now, wait a minute. Over what do I have control in this immediate, intimate situation within which I find myself now?
Mm. So, just for our viewers that may not be familiar, can you just share what those two things are?
You mean what we have control over and what we don't?
Yeah.
Right. Well, in Stoicism, there's this idea of indifference, things, not indifference, but indifference. And these are what we don't have control over are other people's opinion of us, the, again, the outcomes of events. Uh, we don't have control over the weather. Basically, we don't have control over much of anything except how we view what's happening. It's all about what's between our ears.
Mm. Absolutely. Love it. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Sharon, and thank you very much for your time. We appreciate and thank all of you for tuning into this conversation. Sharon and I appreciate you lending us some of your valuable time and attention. We hope that today's broadcast motivates you to lean into an endeavor that matters with greater curiosity and courage. You can learn more about Sharon Lebell and the great work that she's done and doing at SharonLebell.com. And of course, it's always fantastic to see you at CreativeOnPurpose.com. Now, take the insight and inspiration from this conversation and keep flying higher in the difference only you can make. Sharon Lebell, this has been an extraordinary joy, and I could not be more appreciative. Thank you so much for the gift of your time and wisdom.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. Thanks a million.
You're very welcome.
Bye for now.